Live from Millvale. It's Friday morning for the first time in, 3 weeks. I'm back in studio here for another edition of Kaepernick Got Game, the 1st of September, the 1st of fall. You can put it that way if you want, although I'm very strict by the meteorological terms. We have 1 week left of summer, so I'm enjoying that right now. And hey, shorts and short sleeves. It's 80-some degrees today. Beautiful stuff in Pittsburgh after what was a depressing start to the week. In case you're wondering where I was the last 2 weeks, I was parading around Europe with my wife, Jillian. In fact, I talked about that on the last show that I did here right at the end of August. We went through Central Europe, Austria, Czech Republic, Poland, the land of my ancestors, and Hungary and Germany. So I saw plenty of cultures, saw plenty of things, experienced some different foods, that's for sure. So many cultures jammed into that one area, but in a lot of ways it felt like Pittsburgh. It felt like home because we have so many cultures, so many people from different backgrounds in Europe especially jammed into this small alcove in western Pennsylvania. So in a lot of ways it didn't feel that different. In some ways, well, with all the languages being thrown around that weren't English, it did. But I'm very pleased to be back with you. Pleased to have Tyler Zelenko alongside. Thanks again to Brian Crawford and also Sarah Kramer for keeping this program, keeping this radio station going in general. And now into year 4 of Kaepernick Got Game. As I mentioned earlier this summer, we're past the 3-year anniversary, and it feels like full circle now because in addition to coming back from Europe, I've also started a new phase of life, maybe an old phase of life if you want to call it that. I'm back working at Robert Morris University in their athletic department for the media relations team, and that was the same job or a similar job that I had when I started this show in 2015. So yeah, things come full circle for me here in Pittsburgh, and the Robert Morris job was the reason I even returned to Pittsburgh after spending some time in Michigan, but it's good to be home. This is where I grew up, this area. This is where I was born. And Mr. Small's Theater, here where I am coming from you this morning, has really started to feel like a home as well. And we've been up here for about a year. Of course, the show started down the hill at Millvale Studios, and happy to find this location, which continues to get bigger and better. We have another live performance zone, or a new live performance zone here just to my right, stage left, that's going to be opening up here. And looking forward to that. Also, before I get into the meat of today's show, I want to let you know that in a couple of weeks down in Lawrenceville at the Spirit Lounge, PodCon will be going on. There'll be a River's Edge table down there. So if you want to say hi to Brian Crawford and Sarah Kramer, you can. That'll be going on, as I mentioned, in Lawrenceville at the Spirit Lounge. That is 2 Sundays from this weekend. So September the 30th. Mark that down on your schedule. And happy to help spread the word on the River's Edge. Of course, we have the Millvale Music Festival. We've been involved in Heavy Metal Monessen in the past, too. As I look around, we have several promo posters here in the studio. But this show is all mine. This is my little domain on the River's Edge, 1 hour a week. If you haven't tuned in before, it's called Kaepernick Got Game. And it's about sports, ostensibly. It's about sports, though, and the intersection of sports with culture in a lot of ways. And it's not typical sports talk radio is what I'm trying to get at here. So maybe I should just spit that out. It's a little bit different. I try to take a bigger picture angle, or in some cases, especially when I have a featured guest on, we go deep into the details. I find that to be most interesting. So much sports coverage, I find even today, it's getting better, but even today, in 2018, it's that middle range stuff where it's kind of tailored toward the casual fan and kind of tailored toward the diehard, but neither one really gets served. In this case, I'm trying to do both. I'm trying to serve two masters. I want to serve the diehard sports fan, but also the diehard sports fan who's interested in how sports fits in to the greater tapestry of life. And that is how I'll start today's show. But later on in the hour, I'm not immune to the usual enthusiasms of sports fans. I'm excited about hockey being back. The Penguins are on the ice up in Cranberry Township. Training camp has started. And as part of my job with Robert Morris, I'm back working intensively with the men's hockey program, one of the more successful college programs in Western Pennsylvania, and I'm very pleased to be back with them and working with Derek Schooley. I was down at the Island Sports Center checking out practice yesterday. So yes, hockey is back, and it was a little bit longer of a summer than what we've been used to, at least in terms of the Penguins, because they didn't make a deep run in the Stanley Cup playoffs. But hey, they're motivated, they're back, and just as the weather starts to turn, the Penguins are on the ice. And if you don't get a chance, or if you haven't had a chance to go up and check out a training camp practice, I would suggest it. If you are a hockey fan or trying to get into the game, you can learn a lot, and it's free. You can be right up next to the action and see what they're working on. I find that just as insightful sometimes as watching games. But more on hockey later, and the joy that comes with the return of it. Also prep hockey, local youth hockey. Everyone's getting back on the ice here this month. I'll have that, and I'll also talk about the joy of being around sports fans who also make sports their profession. That'll be the closing segment on today's Geigs Got Game. That's in relation to my job at RMU, but I've had that experience in other places, and that's something that I don't take for granted after basically working at home for myself for the past several months. But as I mentioned, to start, I want to harken back to last weekend, where sports and culture intersected once again in a couple of profound ways. And let me be the last one, the last person on Sports Talk Radio to discuss Serena Williams. And I've been a big fan of Serena ever since the start. I remember back in the late 90s, heck, the mid-90s, when they were coming up as teenagers, it was always Venus was the one, the older sister. She got plenty of attention right at the start. And of course, being older, she got an earlier start on the pro tennis circuit, and she got an earlier start in winning Grand Slam titles and just having success on the WTA Tour. And of course, with her father, Richard, and then we learned about the little sister, Serena. But I was always thinking, even at, age 12, age 13, that I felt like Serena might have a chance to at least match her sister, if not be better. And as it turns out, 20 years down the line, one of my predictions that I made back then was right, heaven forbid. And Serena is the greatest women's tennis player of all time, even though she's still one short of Margaret Court's record for Grand Slam singles championships. She's still out there. She's still competing. She's getting back to Grand Slam finals, as we just saw this summer, and looking pretty good doing it, even after nearly losing her life last year, after giving birth to her first child, a daughter, Olympia. And that's been a huge portion of this storyline for Serena this year, which has mostly been a feel-good story. It's been funny watching both tennis and golf, the two individual sports I pay attention to a lot, and you have two giants of the game making comebacks from different situations, but both related to health, and both Serena and Tiger Woods, I'm talking about, of course, if you couldn't figure that out. Both Serena and Tiger are near the end of their traditional primes, or probably past their primes, if we're looking at the history of their respective sports. Serena in her late 30s, Tiger in his early 40s. Tiger coming back from back fusion surgery and just all the physical ailments that piled up over the past several seasons. And look at him contending at the PGA Championship, making the Tour Championship in the PGA's FedEx Cup playoffs. That'll be this next weekend that we'll get to see that. He'll be in the Ryder Cup, which is very exciting. Maybe my favorite golf event, or right up there with the U.S. Open. And then you see Serena going to the U.S. Open final, not getting that Grand Slam that would put her in a tie for the most all time, but as she so aptly said last week at the U.S. Open after a victory, I'm just getting going here, guys. So give me some time, and maybe I can get back to what I once was. So I will take Serena at face value on that one, but as we know, the reason she was really in the news this past week was not her tennis necessarily. It was about what happened on the tennis court in the U.S. Open final against Naomi Osaka, who beat Serena in straight sets. So congratulations to the up-and-coming 20-year-old, part Japanese, part Haitian. Very interesting background for Miss Osaka. And she outplayed Serena from the first serve to the final point. And that's not something you can say very often for any player on the pro tennis circuit, ever since Serena got it going, really, in the early 2000s. So full credit to her, but of course we're talking about the situation between Serena Williams and the chair umpire, Carlos Ramos, veteran chair umpire, the veteran Serena Williams. They know each other pretty well, but that familiarity did not help their relationship this past Saturday night. And you've probably seen the clips, you've probably seen the highlights of it, but just a Cliff's Notes version. As Serena Williams received coaching from her coach's box, from Patrick Mortoglu, who has been her mentor for several years now. Technically, in United States Tennis Association tournaments, that's not legal, but it does happen quite a bit. And on the WTA Tour, you can even have coaching breaks. You can have coaching during timeouts, which is a departure from tennis tradition. But in the U.S. Open, it's forbidden to receive coaching, and the chair umpire, Ramos, thought he saw Serena looking over at her coach, and he was definitely coaching. He admitted it. And unfortunately for the player, they get penalized in that situation. So it's what amounts to a warning. Then Serena, after playing a loose game in the second set, broke a racket. That's another code violation. It's what they're called in tennis. So that ends up giving a point to her opponent. And then Serena continued to berate the chair umpire for the initial coaching call, primarily, but also I think for the racket breaking violation too. Maybe she felt like he could have given her some leeway. He did not. Serena ends up getting penalized a game, and that puts Osaka on the precipice of a championship, and she converts. So how Serena comported herself, I felt, was unfortunate. She's had these meltdowns before, and it's not just been recently. It's been going way back into her past, going back a decade. Remember when she threatened to stuff a tennis ball down a line judge's throat at the U.S. Open, ended up costing her the final point of a final loss. And she also had a situation where the noise she was making on the court, you've heard her after she hits a strong ground stroke or a serve, that was ruled to be a hindrance to her opponent. That was earlier this decade, and that was another run-in. And she called the chair umpire who called that violation unattractive on the inside. So she's had her meltdown moments. She's had her moments that make you think, Serena, come on, you're better than this. You're the greatest of all time. You don't need to let this stuff get to you and represent yourself in such an immature way. I'll put it that way. I'm not saying I would do any better in those situations, but it doesn't feel very becoming of one of the greatest champions in the history of the sport. But as you know, if you did follow this situation, Serena ended up saying after the match, and during the match actually, in conversing with a couple of higher-ups from the U.S. Open, that she felt the chair umpire's behavior was sexist, and she felt that men get away with a lot more in terms of verbal abuse on umpires. And she also was frustrated by the concept that she had in her head that being accused of receiving coaching branded her as a cheater. And we all know, if you follow tennis, it's a penalty on the coach. It's not a penalty on the player necessarily, even though the player has to take that penalty. And I don't agree with the rule necessarily. I think coaching should be allowed, but everyone knows the rule. This isn't some surprise here. So I wonder what's in Serena's heart when she says something like that. Was she just trying to dig her way out of a hole and excuse her bad behavior? Or did she really feel like many commentators said afterward, who are veterans on the tennis circuit or who have been around tennis for a while, that the men do get away with a lot more? I think it's worthy to have that discussion. But to get to my greater point here, if you've never watched tennis, or you've barely watched tennis, or you just see Serena as a feminist icon, which she is, no doubt, but if you don't have that experience with tennis, I find it hard to respect your opinion on this whole situation, because there are nuances to it, which I just tried to explain. Serena was not being branded as a cheater by the chair umpire. This is just a rule that's in place, and it's all based on the actions of a coach, not a player. So, and again, Serena knows this, but she played it up like she didn't. I'm not sure if that's legitimate, if that's authentic, if she was being truthful, or it was just a way for her to maybe get the crowd on her side, a way for her to maybe deflect blame. We've seen great players in all sports do this in the past. It's not my fault, it's your fault. Perhaps it's part of that mental aura that helps them compete and helps them win more than others and helps them have that edge. And it's tough to say that if you took away that edge from Serena that sometimes leads to this type of behavior on court, would that affect her play? I don't know. Maybe it would downgrade her play. It's tough to say. And if you took that away, maybe she wouldn't have that fire to dominate as she has over and over again on the women's tennis tour. So I'm not saying that Serena has to change, but I am saying those jumping in off the top rope, those delivering their opinion without much experience in the world of tennis or without even looking into it. You can be an outsider and learn about something. I think that's to be commended, right? To look into the details and see every angle of the situation. I felt like so often, whether it be on social media or even in the case of some professional journalists and commentators, they didn't take that time and they just said, well, obviously Serena's right. Obviously this was sexist behavior by the umpire. Obviously she was wronged. And that's the most important thing to take away from this. I'm saying there's a lot more nuance to it. And as I tried to express in a couple of tweets in the immediate aftermath, Twitter not the best format for nuanced conversation, but I gave it my best shot. I think you can say that Serena misbehaved. She was in the wrong. And also the umpire could have done better, especially a veteran umpire, in giving Serena a warning when she was continuing to harp upon these calls that she felt were wronging her, were taking points from her. I think it's on Ramos to say, okay, one more word out of you, and you're getting the game penalty, and that'll be especially damaging to your chances to try to win this thing. I think if you give that opportunity, then if Serena goes over the edge, if she continues to talk, then it's completely justified to take the game away. But as many have said, including on ESPN, the broadcaster of the U.S. Open, we heard from both McEnroes, we heard from Pam Shriver, we heard from Chris Everett, a veteran, a longtime veteran of both now commentary and playing tennis back in the 70s and 80s. Usually those warnings are given, and part of the job of an umpire, of an official in any sport, not just tennis, is to manage the situation. So I'm not saying that Ramos was blameless. I'm just saying it's a little bit closer to the middle of this conversation. Serena wasn't totally in the wrong, perhaps, but she wasn't totally in the right. That's for darn sure. And the same can go for Carlos Ramos. So my frustration is not with anybody who expresses an opinion, but those who just jump in and say, well, she was being branded a cheater, and how would you expect her to react? And, of course, men get away with more. I'm going to respect the opinion of those who are around the sport, who have said that, as opposed to someone who just comes in and tries to piggyback on this and use this for their own purposes. And the cause of feminism, the cause of advancing women in the workplace, which Serena has tried to represent as well, all obviously worthy causes. But get the argument right and try to understand the situation completely when you come in from the outside. If you're a tennis fan like me, or if you're just a sports fan who pays attention to the various rules and regulations in various sports, I'm sure that had to be frustrating for some of you, not just me, to hear people coming from outside the world of sports and trying to act like they knew exactly what was going on in the situation. Because you don't, and we don't really either, but at least we understand the context here. So there's that. And then, to jump away from sports completely here, we had the signing of Colin Kaepernick to a contract by Nike. Nike sticking its neck out, and, well, as it turns out, they just closed the business day on Thursday with their highest stock price ever. So it might have been a very calculated business move. Well, it was. I know it was a calculated business move, but it might have been a good business move, as it turns out, to try to get into a new market, to market to people who are attracted by Colin Kaepernick's stance and by his actions, too. Let's not forget, and that's what people forget so much when we talk about Kaepernick, is they go back to 2 years ago when he first started kneeling during the anthem. Well, this guy, since being blackballed from the NFL, has put his money where his mouth is, literally. He's given millions to charitable causes. He's given, just as importantly, his time and effort to charitable causes, to helping support the people who are less fortunate, who he feels have been discriminated against, who need the help. He has taken advantage of having some extra time because NFL teams won't sign him, and he's gone out and done all these great things. So that's what people forget for me. And when people just continue to take shots at Nike for getting out of the sports world, for not sticking to sports, for signing a guy who is very polarizing, no doubt. There are proponents to the positive, and there are detractors to the negative, and we have pretty much dug a trench between those groups of people. I'm on the positive side because I feel like his heart was in the right place. He even went to an ex-Marine, for goodness sakes, to get his advice on how he should conduct this silent protest during the anthem. He went from sitting the first time to kneeling because that most mimicked a Marine stance during a Marine's funeral. That's where that comes from. And if you don't know that, then maybe you find it easier to criticize. But again, I think it's on us. The onus is on the individual to examine these situations and understand everyone's point of view. You understand Colin Kaepernick's point of view, or at least you can try, even if you don't think there's any discrimination in policing, even if you disagree with everything that he said publicly about why he knelt during the anthem before NFL games. Even if you disagree with all of that, you can understand why he did what he did, and you can understand, like he said in the ad that played during Thursday Night Football last week, why he has sacrificed so much, sacrificed the life that he wanted, the career that he was building for a cause that is outside of himself, for a cause that directly doesn't affect him. For being selfless, he's thrown away a lot of the trappings of an NFL life that he very well could have continued to linger in and maybe even thrive in. Who knows? Players have had career revivals in their late 20s and their early 30s at the quarterback position. But all that's been gone out the window because of this unofficial ban that the NFL has levied against Colin Kaepernick. And when I say ban, I mean teams just won't sign him. And clearly, his stance and the controversy that surrounds him has kept teams that probably should have given him a shot from doing so. And you look at Nike, I appreciate Nike's stance in this very much, almost as much as Kaepernick, because they have a lot to lose. Nike hasn't had the most sterling reputation in terms of, well, we know their role in the sweatshop controversy of the mid-90s. To their credit, they revamped their factories over in Southeast Asia. They made them the best in the business, at least in that part of the world, and they did as much as they could within those cultures. But yeah, they took a hit back then. They've taken hits over the years for pricing items high, for doing capitalist things. But this strikes me, even though it might pay off from a business side of it, as a very uncapitalist thing, as a philanthropic thing. And if you know their founder, Phil Knight, I just read his autobiography, in fact, so this is fresh in my mind. If you know Nike's stance on a lot of things, they want to keep that rebel mentality. They want to take chances. They want to be the roguish company. They want to be the trailblazers, as they were in the early 70s when they signed on Steve Prefontaine, the legendary runner from Oregon, and when they were the newcomer to the sports game, when they were trying to wedge their way in and take some market share from Adidas and Puma and all the big sporting goods companies of yesteryear. Now Nike's the top dog, and they have been for a while, but they want to act like they did back then. They want to keep the spirit alive, as Phil Knight has said, and he's hired people to that effect, and I think they have in this way because they've taken a risk. They've taken a big risk. Maybe it'll pay off. In the short term, it looks like it has. Maybe it won't in the long term. I don't know. They've definitely gotten themselves in the news. Maybe that was part of the reasoning behind it too. But anytime you put yourself behind such a controversial figure, someone who's not even really in sports anymore, even though he made his name in sports, in Colin Kaepernick, that strikes me as something to be celebrated, the risk-taking, I mean. Even if you don't agree with the decision, to have that motivation, to have that willingness to stick your neck out. Courage is what it is, really, and I think that needs to be applauded in many ways. So, again, whether it's Serena, whether it's Kaepernick, if you're going to touch the third rail, if you will, on some of these sports-adjacent topics, whether it's sexism in tennis, whether it's the right for someone to protest and the right of a company, and the wisdom of a company attaching themselves to such a controversial figure, not just in sports, but in the world of politics, in the real world sphere, at least take the time to get to understand what's going on here. And that's what I pride myself in. Maybe this sounds self-aggrandizing, but I think that's the standard we should all hold ourselves to. Let's not judge right away. Let's take some time to learn, and then you can formulate an opinion that you can feel good about and that you can broadcast to the world, in the case of myself here on today's edition of Geiks Got Game. Well, thanks for hanging with me through a rather lengthy first period on today's show. I appreciate you, and I hope you appreciate this program. I'll be back in just a moment on Geiks Got Game. This is the River's Edge radio network, found at riversedgepgh.com. Also broadcasting on Facebook Live on my Facebook page, Matt Geitka Media. When I return, let's talk some sports. Let's talk some hockey and why I'm happy to see it back beyond the obvious reasons. Just keep it right here. Back on Geiks Got Game from Mr. Small's Theater in Millvale, PA. I am Matt Geitka. Tyler Zelenko is the man to my left, putting up the pretty pictures behind me. Studio looks great. I was gone for 2 weeks, and it feels like it's a whole new place. And credit goes to Brian as well, Brian Crawford, who was in here to help get us sailing on the correct course on this Friday morning. I always like to go to experts, and I was just talking about this before the break, about consulting with, just information, but also talking with people who know, how I respect the opinions of people who are closer to situations. That seems to be kind of on the outs these days. Everyone wants to make a judgment from afar because we think we know, but we really don't. But there is someone who's closer to the tennis circuit than me, obviously. I don't cover it. I've only been to a couple of tournaments in my life. But past guest on this program, Jared Wickerham, photographer at large, now working for the City Paper here in Pittsburgh, but he also shoots multiple tennis tournaments a year, and he checks in to say that the men do get away with more when it comes to chatting and berating the chair umpires in tennis matches. He says, watch any Kyrgios match, that's Nick Kyrgios, the Australian, the hothead Australian. He says, love the guy for his play, but he does it as in abusing officials. And I don't doubt that. I think there are certainly some outliers on the men's tour, and Kyrgios is probably the biggest culprit in that way. But I also don't think that Serena should have expected to continue to just harp on this call that she didn't like for changeover after changeover after changeover. She had to know something was coming at some point, I would imagine. So she's not faultless in this, even if she has a point about there needing to be an even standard for verbal abuse on both the men's and the women's tennis tours. And there was one instance that was definitely sexist, that highlighted a sexist part of the tennis rule book that happened at the U.S. Open 2 weeks ago. Alizé Cornet, a French player, female player, sorry if you didn't realize that obviously there, but French names can be a little different, but she tried to change her shirt. Actually, she found out she had her shirt on inside out or backward, I forget which it was, when she was on the court, and so she just took it off quickly and put it back on. And apparently, because women can't do that, even though men can sit there shirtless in the chair between points or between games, that part of the rule book is obviously sexist. She was penalized. She was given a code violation. She had a sports bra on, to be clear. There was no full frontal nudity on the court in Flushing Meadows, New York. But because she's a woman, apparently she can't change a shirt on court. So that's ridiculous. I think we're all mature enough to handle a woman changing her shirt in front of a group of people in that scenario. That's fine. That we can all be trusted with that. There is no fainting couch necessary in this case. So that's one part of the rule book that tennis needs to change like yesterday. It needs to have happened already, because that doesn't make much sense. And Jared also says they all coach, in reference to the coaching penalty that Serena got. And we all know this. If you follow tennis at all, you see coaches gesturing, as Serena's coach ended up getting penalized for it. Jared says almost every point, poor choice to single her and her coach out in the final. I don't care what tournament it is. I think you give a warning first. I don't care what stage of a tournament it is. I think you give a warning before you penalize a point. These comments from Jared coming on Facebook. So if you're watching on Facebook, feel free to chime in. I'll try to answer your comments. And Jared's always chiming in, and I appreciate that whenever he does get the chance to check out the show, whether you're watching or listening on riversedgepgh.com. It's great to have you aboard. Let's talk hockey. As you may have imagined, the image behind me, if you are watching on Facebook, is the NHL Shield. Most training camps have begun. The Penguins has begun in earnest today up in Cranberry at the Lemieux Sports Complex. And in some ways, doesn't feel very long ago that they were eliminated from the playoffs in Game 6 of their second-round series against the eventual Stanley Cup champion Washington Capitals. Boy, does that sound weird, right? It still does. I'm not sure I'll get used to that one for a while. I'm not sure the Capitals themselves and their fans certainly will get used to that one for a while. But neither here nor there. It does mark the unofficial return of hockey, does the start of training camp, and I'm happy for that because, well, number one, I've talked about this year, but for whatever reason, I felt more disconnected from baseball this year. Even with the Pirates being interesting throughout the season, I haven't watched as much baseball. And maybe it was because the World Cup was in effect in June and through early July. That took up a lot of my time. Maybe because I'm just more involved with my young son, Lucas, who keeps me busy and doesn't give me a lot of extra time during the evenings, especially before he goes to bed to check out the Buccos. I don't know what it is, but maybe it's the fact that baseball seems to be falling behind in terms of pace, in terms of cultural relevance. I'm not sure. Maybe it's just the Pirates not being a player in Major League Baseball as much as they were 3 years ago, or certainly as much as some of the bigger market teams have been traditionally. And the fact that I still feel like MLB's financial system, or their lack of a financial framework, the lack of a salary cap particularly, does disenfranchise teams like the Pirates, who, even if they spent to their top capabilities, would still not be able to get anywhere near a team like the Dodgers or the Yankees, to name a couple of them. So there are various reasons, but I have definitely fallen back from baseball this summer. Maybe that'll change next year. Maybe if the Pirates are in it right from the start, maybe if they make some big splash move. And they already did in the trade for Chris Archer, which may not pan out, but at least they gave it a shot. But still, that wasn't enough to give the team the shot in the arm they needed. And we are headed toward at least a 500 finish, maybe a little bit above, maybe a little bit below for the Pirates. I'm sure once the postseason kicks in, I'll be interested or more interested again. But as of right now, just disconnected from it. At the same time, there's football going on, obviously. But I've mentioned that I'm trying to step away from football myself. And for various reasons, you can watch the previous show if you want to get into all those. So long story short, I'm very grateful for hockey being back. I miss the fast pace. I know that after I don't watch it for a while, just the speed with which these players operate, even in training camp drills, just blows me away. I was down at Robert Morris Island Sports Center, as I mentioned, to check out the team that I cover for the university, the men's hockey team. And it's just fun to watch them practice. There's something about the sport that has captivated me completely, and it has since the first day I watched it. And it's just refreshing for me as a hockey fan, as someone who's made their living in a lot of ways in the world of hockey, that every year when it returns, I'm still like, oh, wow, I'm ready for it to come back. And I'm not one to rush summer along. I feel like to every season there is a time, to paraphrase the birds or the Bible. But I'm a big believer in that. I think you need to spend some time away before you can miss it. Well, 3 months, 4 months away, especially when it comes to Penguins hockey, when it comes to college hockey, and local prep high school hockey too, it has been a while. And it's time. It's time for it to come back. It's time for us to all get energized. And to be completely frank, the Penguins being a Stanley Cup contender makes it easier for all of us, I think, to get excited about the NHL season. But if you're involved in the sport at the grassroots level like I am, with Robert Morris Hockey, with broadcasting Peters Township High School hockey for the past 3 seasons and going on a 4th now here too, it's all encompassing. It's a part of who I am. I'm going to be playing pickup hockey tonight at the Island, in fact. So not just a spectator, not just a media professional in hockey. I'm also a participant. So perhaps all of that comes together, and it just gives me that warm and fuzzy feeling this time of the year. And it's spectacular to go back into the cool rinks of Western Pennsylvania and see this game being played again. I know a lot of you out there feel the same way that I do. It's not just about the Penguins being good. It's not just about the top level and the glamorous nature of the top level of the sport at the NHL. And if you've watched this show, if you've listened to this show in the past, you know I'm all about the grassroots too, and that I love the game at all levels. I love the women's game. RMU's women have now collected a College Hockey America championship. Atlantic Hockey is the men's conference. College Hockey America is the women's conference, but they're one of the most successful athletic programs in the city of Pittsburgh in Western Pennsylvania too, from a collegiate perspective. So I'm fired up to see them back out there. I think women's hockey translates really well. If you're used to watching men's hockey, I don't think it's that big of a jump. And I think you'd be surprised if you don't watch women's hockey, how physical it is, how fast it is, and how skilled it is. So in a lot of ways, I'm just as excited for the RMU women taking the ice again. And I'm excited for the idea of another women's professional game up in Cranberry this season. Maybe the chance of a women's professional team coming to Pittsburgh. Who knows? We can keep our fingers crossed on that one, but that would be spectacular as well. But the sport is growing. I feel like it is the biggest growth industry in local sports. Every time I talk to people who are involved with football at the high school level, including just this past week, they talk about how football rosters are decreasing as parents aren't allowing their kids to play, aren't allowing their young boys to play high school football as they once were. I'm not saying hockey is a totally safe sport. I'm not even saying soccer or baseball or softball or volleyball. All these sports have their inherent risks when it comes to concussions and other things. But it just feels to me like hockey is on the rise, especially here. And if it hasn't already taken over as the biggest sport at the grassroots level in Pittsburgh, then I think it'll get there in the next 5 to 10 years. And I'm excited about being part of a growth industry in that way too. So there is that aspect of the excitement of the return of hockey season that has swept me up, and I'm re-energized here. For a lot of people, this time of the year gets them re-energized because the humidity of summer breaks. For me, it's more about the return of pucks, and we'll be talking about that plenty on this show in the near future, in the distant future. As you know, with the summer, it's been a little bit of baseball, but a lot more golf and tennis and all of that, and I love those sports too. but hockey will always be my first love. It will always be the one that gets me the most excited at the start of the season. And so we have a couple of weeks before NHL season starts. College hockey season is on the way too. So is the local high school season. Support your local team. In the PIHL, it's a growing league. And as I mentioned, I'll be back on the call for our good friend Alan Saunders' website on Facebook Live. Pittsburgh Hockey Digest is where you can find all sorts of coverage of the amateur level of the sport below the Penguins. So we're talking Robert Morris hockey. We're talking local club hockey, even with the folks at Duquesne and Pitt here in town. Also Chatham, Division III program. And we're talking about high school. We're talking about youth hockey as well. So a cheap plug for my good friend Alan and Brian Mitchell and what they're doing over there. And I hope you can continue to follow me. I hope you will continue to follow me to keep you up to date on all that's going on, not just with the Penguins, which I will be following closely and talking about often on this show, but also all the levels below it that are all just as wonderful. In some cases, I find them even more enjoyable and for various reasons there that maybe I can get into a little bit down the line. Anyway, this is Gike's Got Game, and yes, I'm fired up for hockey season returning, and not just the league that's behind me, but every level of it. It's on the doorstep, folks, and we're ready to transition into that time of the year. And I hope we can all celebrate it in our own ways. Back in a moment, and I'll be talking about, to close the show, my enjoyment in getting back into the hot box of the media relations department at Robert Morris University. Don't get the wrong idea, but we all feed off each other. We're all obsessed with sports, and it's just energizing to be around that type of an atmosphere. I'll get into that to close out the show after this short break and some local music here on the River's Edge. Back for the third and final period on Gike's Got Game. It's structured like a hockey game, too. You can tell I'm a puck nut in that way. Sorry if I rambled a bit last segment. I'm boiling over with energy here. And Penguins camp has got me thinking about hockey. But like I said, I'm working for Robert Morris University again, so being around the men's hockey team, taking into practice yesterday, that all contributes to my puck fever here. And I know it's a long way to go in the season. We're going to be playing hockey until the middle of June, as always, for the Stanley Cup Final. But in a lot of ways, after a quick summer refresher, I can't get enough, and that's just the reality of who I am. I hope you can appreciate the passion, at least. If you're not a big hockey nut like I am, I'm sure you have something out there, whether it be in the world of sports or otherwise, that you really latch on to. And, well, I'll get to that in just a moment. I want to make sure I pay the bills here, so to speak. Make sure to mark your calendars. I mentioned this at the top of the show, but Pittsburgh PodCon is coming. It'll be International Podcast Day on September the 30th. That's a Sunday. By the way, the final day of September will feature more than 30 Pittsburgh podcasts available to meet with you and also try to convince you to subscribe to them. That'll be coming up at the Spirit Lounge in Lawrenceville on the 30th of September. 4 live podcast recordings will be going on, and there'll be 1 discussion panel broadcast for International Podcast Day. I'm excited about it. And yeah, there you see the graphic behind me. You can learn more on Facebook, but the River's Edge Facebook page, the River's Edge website at riversedgepgh.com has more information on that. But the PodCon is coming. The Pod Convention is coming to the Spirit Lounge in Lawrenceville. Okay, time to put a bow on the show. And as I've mentioned a couple of times, I'm back working at Robert Morris at RMU, the campus in Moon Township. I'm working for the athletic department. Transitioning from the role of independent journalist back to media relations and PR. And, well, in a lot of ways, it's not... I struggle finding the words to describe exactly what the job is, because in a lot of ways, I'm reporting from the inside. In terms of the men's hockey team, we'll be producing a short documentary series every month, or an episode in the documentary. So that's not really PR in the traditional sense or media relations. That's making your own media outreach. And in a busy sports market like this, when you are a university in a pro sports market like this, and especially a university like RMU that's still trying to carve out its niche, then you have to do your own promotions. And so, yeah, it is almost promotions. It's almost marketing. There are several aspects to what I'm going to be doing, but it's all about promoting and getting the word out on these teams, especially the men's hockey team at the start of my second tenure over at RMU. But the experience that I have working in the athletics office is rather enjoyable. I enjoyed that aspect of it. That was one of the more enjoyable parts of my job the first time I was working there. Because traditionally I've worked for, well, in the case of junior hockey, I was the one media person on staff. And that can be fun because you're the expert on media matters and you get to run the show for the most part. But also it can be lonely because people don't understand the struggles of, say, preparing for a broadcast and how much time that takes during a given week, or putting together game notes, or all these things that make up the minutia of a job like that, of a media relations, promotional, PR job, broadcasting job, whatever it might be. In this case, working in what was once called the Sports Information Office, now called the Media Relations Office at RMU, I have brothers and sisters in arms. I have people who understand those struggles, but also I have people who are just addicted to sport like I am. And I've tried to branch out with my interests. I've tried to get more culture. I've tried to do things that are more productive for the community at large beyond just fueling my own sports addiction. But in a lot of ways, that's who I am. So maybe it's a lesson for all of us to not try to change ourselves so much, but try to angle our passions and our energies in a way that will benefit the most people. And that's what I'm always trying to do. Maybe that's where your true vocation lies in life. And I feel like my vocation is more in this side of it, in promoting teams that may not have as much publicity as, say, the Penguins or the Pirates or the Steelers. And don't get me wrong, I would love to work for a major league franchise someday, and that was always the dream coming up, was to be the next Mike Lang or the next Greg Brown. And maybe that'll still come to the forefront. And I still pursue broadcasting as a way to not just in many ways exercise my strengths, but also to keep those dreams alive. But also for me, it's about being in sports, working in sports, and working around people who share the same perspectives that you do, or similar perspectives. Not everyone's going to feel the same way about, say, the Serena Williams situation. We had a nice discussion on Monday at Joe Walton Stadium, which is where the athletics offices are currently at Robert Morris. We had a great discussion about all of that on Monday, and we all shared some ideas. But it's just really cool to be around people who love sports so much that they wanted to make it a career, and they have made sacrifices. We're not getting paid as much as some people out there, but we're working in an area that we're passionate about. And it doesn't have to be sports. It could be in your life. It could be anything, any walk of life that you're in, any profession that you're in. If you feel really good about it, if you all share that same dedication, if you have that same energy, then it can all propel you to bigger and better things. And that's what I hope everyone can experience in their work life. That's what I'm experiencing right now, and it's refreshing to get back to it. Not that I didn't have that, say, at Pittsburgh Hockey now, or other places that I've worked at, DK Pittsburgh Sports. In those cases, I was always working with people and alongside people who were very good at what they did, in a lot of cases very passionate about their profession. But we're always going in different spots. We were working from home. We were working on the road. In this case, I think it's actually underrated, and it's kind of been regarded as antiquated now. The joy of just being in the same physical space as people that you get along with and that you share similar passions with. That's important too. I think we're all human, right? And all this virtual communication, it can depersonalize. It can take away from some of that energy. So I've just really enjoyed being in the same space as people where we can have these pointed discussions and everyone's at least on the same page as far as knowing what's going on, and everyone's engaged in the work and wanting to do the best they can do. It's not something that we should take for granted, and I think maybe at times in my life I have. I don't plan on doing so this time around at Robert Morris University, and looking forward to really sinking my teeth into this gig the second time around. It's also good to get a second chance, right? So you can look back and appreciate what you had before, and you can try to revamp and do better on what you have done in the past. That's a chance that I don't think many people get to. So I'm just coming to you in this mood of gratitude for this edition of Guy's Got Game on this Friday, September the 14th, 2018. Thank you so much for being with us from Millvale, Pennsylvania, at the Mr. Smalls Theater Studios on top of the hill. And thank you to Tyler Zelenko for running the show. Thank you to you for listening and watching. This is Matt Geiger reminding you that when the radio fades, you know life's moving fast. We'll talk to you next week, same time, same place. In the meantime, have a great week and God bless. Talk to you soon.